Pleasure of introducing our moderator, Ware Harmon. Ware is the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle and an all-around all-star. We're so grateful to have him join us.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep, you're unmuted.
Give me a thumbs up. Great. So it wasn't very important. Just know that I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall, as Sean said, but I'm appearing today in my role as a citizen concerned about ending gun violence in our society and eager for the chance to understand and consider prospective policy solutions. And so I'm sincerely honored to have been asked to be a part of this conversation. The theme of this event is A Tale of Two Washingtons, which I know was chosen before the coronavirus changed the world as we know it. But if anything, the difference between the two Washingtons has only grown more stark over these last 2 months. This Washington appears to be guided by science and reason, along with empathy, and the belief that our government has a responsibility to protect its citizens. Those values aren't felt as deeply by too many leaders in the other Washington, and you can see evidence of that difference in our approaches to both gun violence and the coronavirus. We're going to tackle all of that today, so I won't take up any more time. Before I introduce today's speakers, we'd like to know who all of you are and your connection to this issue. Please take a moment to answer our first poll question. Which of the following best describes you? I have lost a friend or a loved one to gun violence. I have personally survived an incident involving gun violence. I've not been personally touched by gun violence, but I am deeply concerned about this issue. While we wait for those results, I'd like to welcome our panelists. Governor Jay Inslee needs no introduction, but that won't stop me. Governor Inslee has been a courageous champion of gun violence prevention since his days in Congress. We're lucky to have him leading that fight and the fight against COVID-19 here in Washington. And leadership means a crazy schedule, which in this case means the governor will be jumping off our call a few minutes before we finish here. Next, I'd like to introduce Manny and Patty Oliver. After their son Joaquin was murdered at Parkland High School in 2018, Manny and Patty responded by founding Change the Ref, an organization dedicated to empowering the next generation to fight for their values and impact change. Since then, Manny and Patricia have become inspiring leaders for the gun safety movement, and we're deeply, deeply grateful to have them here today. Next, I want to introduce Renee Hopkins, CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, whom you've actually already heard from. Beautifully, I might add. So much of Washington State's success on these issues is owed to Renee and the Alliance's persistent and effective leadership. And then finally, in just a few minutes, we'll be joined by Representative Pramila Jayapal. She'll only be with us for a portion of the panel discussion, but she herself has been a fierce and tireless advocate in the other Washington, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to hear from her today as well. All right, then, I think we've got the results of our poll question perhaps ready to present. As you'll see, overwhelmingly, nearly 70% are folks who are concerned about the issue without themselves having been personally touched by gun violence in what you might call the kind of profound display of empathy that'll be required, I think, for a lot of white allies to demonstrate the kind of commitments that Renee remarked upon initially. 29% report having lost a friend or loved one directly to the issue of gun violence, and only 6% report having personally survived an incident involving gun violence. I can only imagine how difficult and traumatic it is for anyone who's endured that to be able to continually engage with this. And so I want to thank you for being a part of today's event as well. All right, I want to start the conversation by talking about how COVID-19 and gun violence intersect, perhaps unexpectedly. Renee, can you outline how the global pandemic has impacted gun violence?
Absolutely. First, though, I want to say a couple of really important thank yous. First to you, Ware, for your willingness to join us today. We really appreciate you being here. Also, thank you to all of our other panelists. I'd like to give a very special thank you to Nick and Leslie Hanauer for your continued partnership, leadership, and investment. Thank you to Vulcan and the Ballmer Group for being with us from the beginning. Thank you to Amazon for being our corporate sponsor. Thank you to my board of directors under the leadership of Meredith Goldstein and Lisa Mannion, who've been incredible supports during this unprecedented time. Thank you to our staff, whose creativity and agility always amazes me. And thank you to our partners, who are really too many to name: Brady, Ceasefire, Everytown, Moms Demand Action, March for Our Lives, the faith community, the medical community, and last but not least, the Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, with more than 15 virtual tables today. Imagine that. And to our thousands of volunteers across the state. These past few months have made it more clear than ever just how fortunate we are to have such an engaged, supportive community dedicated to ending gun violence. And we really know that we would be nowhere without each and every one of you. Now on to COVID. At the beginning of COVID, we saw across the country, and in our state was no exception, panic buying at unprecedented levels. So we're dealing with a citizenry that is even more heavily armed than before COVID started. We're also seeing increases in a number of kinds of gun violence. Domestic violence is up across the country, and our state is no exception. We know that the intersection of gun violence and domestic violence increases the likelihood of a woman being killed by 5 times if a gun is present. We also are seeing an uptick in unintentional shootings, up 43% during the first 2 months of the COVID response. And sadly, many of those are young children. We're also anticipating seeing an historic high in suicide. Historically, there's been a correlation between unemployment and suicide. 1% increase in unemployment usually results in 1% increase in suicide. As I spoke about earlier, we're also seeing a lot of police and vigilante violence, and interpersonal violence is also remaining high. So really the only place that we're seeing a reduction in gun violence is in mass shootings and school shootings. And as we're starting to see the country open back up, we can hope and pray that that will not be on the rise again, but the anticipation is that it will be. So really now more than ever, this issue is important. During one pandemic and public health crisis, another one that is gun violence does not go away.
Thank you, Renee. Governor Inslee, I want to turn to you to talk about our state in particular. What did the crisis of gun violence look like in Washington before COVID-19? And can you reflect on how that has changed?
Well, as Renee suggested, the challenges that precipitate gun violence perhaps have increased. But before I comment on that, if it's okay, if I can just comment on our situation we find ourselves in today. It's such a difficult challenges we have in our nation and our state. And I just want to tell you that I think it's a moment where we need to boost each other up, and being with this group boosts me up, because this is a group that has had such profound success. And I just want to thank people for their efforts, having some of the things we've done already in our state and we're going to continue to do. And the reason I mention that is in the middle of this horrible racial injustice that we're experiencing in our state, we're seeing things that lift me up when I saw people by the hundreds coming into Seattle yesterday morning to clean up the broken glass and scrub the writings off the walls. When I just saw the brother of Mr. Floyd say that he was encouraging peaceful protests, he says, stop looting, but keep protesting. There's a lot of ways we can inspire each other. And I just want to thank everybody on this call for inspiring us, because you have done that for the nation and myself. So what it looked like before COVID is it looked like a horrendous plague of gun violence, which is not only a criminal issue, but a health issue. And it looked like a place where inspired citizens needed to band together. And that's what you have done. I want to thank everybody. Band together to close the gun show loophole, to prevent high-risk individuals from having access to guns, to take away guns from those involved in domestic violence, to ban bump stocks, to ban ghost guns. All of those things were progress that this group has been involved in. And so it looked like a place where we had made substantial progress, but a place that we knew we had a lot more work to do. we should not rest until we ban assault weapons. You know, it's really interesting to me. There's a connection to this, what happened in the last couple of days. It was prominently shown that when this police car had been burnt, somebody came in and pulled out, it looked like an AR-15 out of the car, a young man. And he was fiddling with the gun, and then another person came in and took it away from him. And it was interesting because I sensed that everybody was terrified that this young man had got a hold of an AR-15, and they were just stunned that that could happen. Well, guess what? That happens legally every day in the state of Washington. And that's why we need to ban these things. And I will remind people of the terror that they felt when they saw a guy steal it from a police car. We should not allow that to happen legally either. So I'm just suggesting some of the events of the last few days ought to continue to inspire us to the steps forward of the additional work that we have to do. So I would say before COVID, it was a place where we needed more work. And after COVID, it's a place we need more work. And they do have some similarities. They're health issues. This is a health crisis. And we do not talk about the health crisis of people who take their own lives through suicide. And that has to be an increasing part of our message of the people who are threatened. And that's the people who own the guns themselves are threatened by the presence of these guns. And I will continue to help articulate that message. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I think we should open up the lens now to talk about the rest of the country. Manny and Patty, your experience of gun violence isn't just an abstract concept, but a story of transformation after personal loss. Can you first tell us a bit about why you decided to get involved in this movement, and then tell us about Change the Ref itself?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today. We decided to start with the organization. Really, we didn't know how, but since we lost Joaquin in the mass shooting in Parkland, we knew that we're gonna be doing something because we cannot accept that that was in vain. So we decided to think about what is the best way to take. We didn't know, so we were taken out of context. And then after being discussing with a group of friends, we knew that we have to make a difference, but we were just really aligned with the kids from Match for Our Life. That was the first one that we get in touch with.
We didn't have many options, you know. When you lose someone that you love, and basically when you lose your kid, your son, your daughter, there's not a table with options that you can do. There's only a few of them. And I knew the day after I lost my beautiful son and best friend that I needed to do something. With the time and on a very early stage, I also understood that it was not a school violence problem. It was beyond that. It's everywhere. And then that's why our movement, it's been amplified to every single element inside gun violence. That's why we've been in your state demanding for changes locally. And that's why we've been in LA and New York. And we live in what we call the gun state. And some people don't like that nickname, but it applies really, it matches very well with the reality that we live here. Back to the words of the governor, I am more afraid of the legal, easy access to guns that our society is promoting, like the killer of my son was able to do, than the other side of gun violence. This one is the one that we allowed, and this one is the one that is in our hands to change. So that's what brings us here.
Can you tell us about, before I pose that question, I just want to say that while there wasn't any table of automatic choices to make, certainly you had the choice to sort of turn inward and to grieve more privately. But I think that the decision to to share your story and to share your passion and courage and energy with the world after this is such a strong choice that not everyone would necessarily be able to make. And I'm not the first person I know to express my gratitude to you for how you've been able to take this tragedy and transform it into positive change. And can you tell us about Change the Ref and the work that you're doing there?
Sure. And before I do that, let me very briefly explain you something. And this is going to change your perspective about this. Joaquin was my reason to be alive. Okay. And everyone that is a father or mother here understands exactly what I'm saying. Every day I will wake up, go, work, come back because Joaquin was here. And then Joaquin is not here anymore. But guess what? I consider Joaquin a more powerful reason for me to be alive, doing what I do today than before. So our parenting, our role of parents evolve into something different.
Understood.
It's hard, but once you discover that, you get the picture. We started this movement. It's called Change the Ref. Ref as a referee. Joaquin loved the game, basketball. That was his passion. And I know after having a conversation with Joaquin that he will always look for a fair game. So no bad calls from the ref will be accepted. And then we, at some point after losing Joaquin, understood that our refs are making pretty bad calls and we don't have a fair game here. Actually, one of the teams is paying our refs to do the calls. And now I'm talking about the gun lobby giving money for campaigns, political campaigns. So I will never trust someone that in any way is aligned with the gun industry as a politician to represent me. And I think I'm not saying anything that anyone ignores. This is a reality and it's out there. These are open numbers.
And also we noticed that the kids needs that power. So the kids are empowering through our organization also to make something different. It's something that is more aligned to what they think, the way they could do things, they do things. And we want just to be the backup of them. So we are motivated by them, for them, because we believe in their future. So I think that we as an adults, we are parents of all the kids that are surrounding us today. We are honoring Joaquin in every single one of them. And we are able to be giving them that missing factor that they were looking for, that is to see an adult that is aligned and they understand and we can do things together without, being against or pro, just together. We work as a team and we're very proud of that. We've been seeing it.
And I've heard a lot about leadership styles and leadership perspectives in my life, but this is the first time I've heard somebody talk about extending your role as parents and turning that into the foundation of leadership and amplifying the voices of the young people and allowing them to sort of be in front of the work of the organization and just supporting them. It's really powerful. Before we move on to Renee, I just have one more quick question, which is about, tell us about what's been going on at the grassroots level over these past few months as the coronavirus crisis has unfolded. And can you talk about what Change the Ref and or other advocacy groups have been doing maybe differently in this context?
Well, you know that we use a lot of art and advertising strategies to come out with a new way of narrative and a new message, a very powerful way of letting people understand what's going on. So for me, immediately when I saw the COVID-19 appearing and I saw the reaction of kind of ignoring it at the beginning, and then the whole concern was about the economy more than the people itself, which is the base of the economy. So we came out with a campaign that it's a soap shaped as a gun. So we call it the antiviral weapon. And as Change the Ref, we did from home these soaps, and then we just send it out there. And the whole point, the whole concept is that the more it vanishes, the less gun you have and the safer you are, because basically with the COVID, you only need to wash your hands and keep your distance. So we always try to make that connection between things that hurt the same. I mean, there is no death that will hurt more than other. And we get that. And we need to see these. Actually, here it is. See, this is what I'm talking about.
That is awesome.
That's soap on the shape of a gun. So, and then again, we live in Florida, which is not a very friendly state when it comes to things like this. But we're going to keep on. No one's going to vote us out. That's the good news. Okay, we're not running for anything. And this, no one wants to be where we are, but now that we're here, we're going to stay here doing what we do. And I don't see us doing anything else or stopping doing what we do.
Thank you for it. And you're not term limited. That's important to remember. I've just been told that Representative Jayapal is with us, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to turn to you now, Pramila, to help us understand the landscape at the federal level, the other Washington. We've talked through how the coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated many of the risks of gun violence. We've also touched on the devastating instances of police violence and racist vigilante murders of Black Americans that have come to light in recent weeks. And we've heard a bit about what's been going on in Washington state in the grassroots level in response. But let's hear about these topics and talk about what, if anything, the federal level is doing to address the gun violence during COVID in particular, the threat of gun violence during COVID in particular. Pramila?
Thank you so much, Ware, and it's really wonderful to be with you, Renee. Thank you for your leadership at the Gun Alliance as well. Governor, we're so grateful to you for leading our state. And most importantly, Manny and Patty, thank you for everything that you are doing. I think I last saw you at an event that the Alliance did back in the days when we could get together. And I just so deeply appreciate the strength with which you're leading. And perhaps it starts in terms of Congress and what Congress hasn't done and why. And it goes back to your point, Manny, about the influence of the gun lobby on Congress, both in terms of money. I don't take any corporate PAC money. I never have, I never will. But I think that the influence is more than money, frankly. It's also the culture of violence and the arguments that get made around why people deserve to have guns without any kind of safety precautions, any kind of licensing precautions. And so the House, when we took office, when Democrats took the majority, we did move several gun bills through. And they were, in many ways, in my opinion, frankly, they were the lowest hanging fruit. They were the things that everybody was going to agree should be done, like closing gun loopholes and things like that. We have a number of other bills around safe storage. I have a bill that I've introduced with Elliot Engel. But these are all stalled because we passed them through the Democratic House and the Senate, Republican Senate, has not picked them up. This is not a partisan issue. It never should be a partisan issue. When kids are killed, it's not partisan. When people die, it's not partisan. This is happening across the ideological spectrum. And so we have work to do around corporate accountability and responsibility and getting money out of politics. We have work to do around electing people who are willing to stand up for these things, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. And we will continue to push for that. I think that in the context of what's happening, and I just got off a very emotional call with my own staff in terms of what's happening right now around violence, I think it's important to say that who has the guns is also something that we will have to take on. I think that in some ways the gun violence movement, and I think Parkland, in part thanks to you all and letting young people lead, and I think young people really understand the dynamic of where violence is occurring with guns in numerous communities, including urban communities. It's not just in schools, as you said, Manny. And so how do we really use this movement that has been built around gun violence and stopping gun violence to really understand that there's gun violence happening in a lot of places. And some of it is sanctioned violence with guns with our law enforcement individuals. Of course, not every law enforcement person is bad. That's not what anybody is saying. However, when we look at the issue of gun violence and who is dying and who has guns, these are important issues we have to take on, and we have to diversify our movement for gun violence so that it responds to the issues of deep trouble that we are seeing erupting across the country right now. What we're seeing in the streets isn't also just about the murder of one man. It is about constant murders, extrajudicial killings. It is about the deaths that happen when people don't have access to healthcare, or what happens when there's despair around jobs or income. It is a deep confluence of factors that is built into our country's, unfortunately, built into our country's institutions. And so unless we're willing to think about how we take all of that on, I think we will continue to see gun violence killing people, not only in schools, but in our urban centers. And I think that is the challenge that we have to start getting comfortable as well, talking about and thinking about how we diversify this movement, how we think about guns in the hands of different people that still have to be responsible, even if they're given the authority and the responsibility to serve and protect and to keep us safe. And so I hope that, as we continue the conversation, we think about this in a much more expanded way, in the way that COVID, frankly, is forcing us to think about all kinds of issues. Things needed to be done even before before COVID happened. But now, in the time of COVID, we're also facing an increase in the purchase of guns across the country. Domestic violence agencies that are working overtime to try to address the issues of women who are facing increased violence and survivors of violence who are facing increased challenges. The incidences of domestic violence have gone up substantially during the time of COVID, and the purchases of guns have gone up dramatically during the time of COVID. So we are also pushing to get some of those things included into our COVID relief, that we have to recognize that isolation and staying home, which we desperately need to beat the virus, also has brought us some other challenges that we also need to address. And so I think that, we are looking at a series of issues around violence in general, around COVID in particular, and around guns and race in particular in this moment. I kind of feel like everything has come together in the most awful of ways, in spite of leadership from important people in our state, like the governor. We are in this place where there's just a lot of despair. And I think the one thing we can learn from you, Manny and Patty, and many of the parents that I have met who have come to my office, and we've cried together and we've prayed together and we've gotten angry together and we've pushed legislation together, is that it is that very acting in the moment of deepest crisis and the moment of greatest pain that is the time that we can make some progress. And so my hope is that the leadership that we've been able to show in Washington State with our ballot initiatives, really leading the way, the Alliance for Gun Responsibility really leading the way on those, but also in terms of some of the things we've done around Initiative 940, De-Escalate Washington, in terms of the Supreme Court, the Washington Supreme Court's actions around, getting juries to not have discrimination in jury selection. Now we have to take this even to a higher level, both on our fight at the federal level, but also on our local level. And I've been speaking to my labor brothers and sisters, who I'm very, very close to, about how we address the issue of violence that comes from some of our law enforcement agencies, and how important it is to think about this moment in terms of the rage and the pain that people feel. So we will continue to work on all of those things at the federal level. We have, as I said, already passed some bills, but we have several more that we want to continue to push forward, including the assault weapons ban, including the safe storage bill that Elliot Engel and I have introduced. but we also need to get these other bills passed, and we need to have action taken that doesn't weaponize weapons, doesn't weaponize the culture of violence. And so we're grappling with all of those right now. And in addition to that, the protections of particularly survivors of violence who are essentially isolated in even bigger ways, forced to stay home and be at the mercy of their assaulters. And so those are all the issues that are in front of us right now. And we're just so grateful to you, Manny and Patty, and to the Alliance for all of the work that you're doing to help us lead in this moment. And I'm so proud to be from Washington State, which has been leading on the national level and will continue to do so, I know.
Representative Jayapal, I know you have to go, but if you've got time for just one quick thing, you alluded to a couple of legislative initiatives that are happening at the federal level right now. Beyond support for those, or including support for those, what's the best way for regular advocates like us to lead change on gun violence prevention at the congressional level right now? Give us some marching orders, if you will.
Well, I'm an organizer, and so I believe that change happens through organizing. I believe that the reason that we have some of the best immigration laws in the country in Washington State is because we started organizing and we pushed for them, and we've got leaders who responded. And so I do think that pushing on the local, state, and federal level is important through, I mean, we can't call it street advocacy right now because we're not in the streets, but we're still online. People still have a voice. And so lifting up the stories of people that are affected and trying to make that storytelling as diverse as possible. This isn't just about people who are killed in one place or with one type of weapon. This is about a culture of violence where particularly Black and brown folks, frankly, and particularly Black folks, as is being lifted up in this moment, are at the forefront of being murdered. And so we've got to be talking about that. And I would just ask everybody to think about how we build our coalition more broadly and more diversely. Secondly, I think the idea that Manny raised about, making sure that your representatives are not taking contributions from places. I mean, Elizabeth Warren and I have a bill around, really trying to get money out of politics. I think that's really important. It's not the whole answer. That's not the only reason people do what they do, but it is a big factor in terms of whose voice is right outside our doors. And so I would say that that's a competing, or not competing, but a corollary to what people can do is push for money out of politics and really elect people who are going to put this forward on either side of the aisle. I'm not just talking, of course, I'm a Democrat. I want Democrats to be elected, but I'm talking about on any side of the aisle that people should be making their decisions based on what is the right policy, not based on where the money is going to come from for the campaign. And then third, I think that it is really important to let young people lead. They're not just our future. I hear people say all the time, oh, you're our future. No, actually, they're the present. They are the present. They are the reason that gun violence got elevated to the level it did, because young people refuse to take no for an answer. And frankly, it hasn't been beaten out of them that they're thinking too big yet. We should never allow people to tell us we're thinking too big. What is our purpose on this earth if it isn't to think about big ideas and to try to move real change that is substantial? So encouraging young people to be the leaders of this movement, but also to recognize that there is wisdom from other generations and trying to facilitate that intergenerational leadership. One of the most beautiful things I saw was on the Civil Rights Pilgrimage, where John Lewis was speaking with some of the young Black activists on gun violence. It was so incredible to watch that conversation and that learning that was going on. So thank you again to Manny and Patty for encouraging that and for putting that front and center.
And thank you, Representative Jayapal. We know you're going to probably ditch us in just a second. So thank you again so much for being with us.
Never ditch you, always with you.
Always with, even when, So I want to swivel into our Q&A session, everyone. And as you might imagine, we've got a backlog of questions for just about everybody, but I'm going to start with Governor Inslee. Roberta asks, Governor, could you talk about the influence of the gun lobby in Washington state?
Well, obviously, it is unfortunately significant. It is demanding of members, and that works to be demanding of legislators. And it is politically powerful. And it has unfortunately been successful to allow a very small number of our citizens to hijack and hold hostage the rest of the state. And it is a relatively small minority, as the initiatives have suggested, that we have now passed with overwhelming success. So we need to understand that the majority of citizens are with us on these issues, that want these bills, want an assault weapon bill, want to do the things that we've already done, and want more security in their lives. And so we need to sort of start with that understanding. But we do have to understand something else too, is that there are voters who support this, but they are in the minority. And that means we have to get people to vote. And I think that one of the things that we all have to focus on, just on sort of a strategic basis, is we just have to have more people to vote. Because the more people vote, the more of these initiatives we're going to win. And the more people who vote, the more legislators we will elect, because more people share our views than the NRAs. So we got to get folks to vote. And when that happens, we will win many, many more battles. And we won't always win them the first time. Look, I lost my seat in Congress in 1994, casting one of the pivotal votes to pass the assault weapon bill. But I've never regretted that vote. And now we're moving forward on gun safety like crazy while I've been governor. So we should not allow temporary setbacks. These are temporary things. We're going to continue to advance the cause of safety and health and justice because of the people on this call. So I want to thank everybody's help. I think somebody gave Nick Hanauer a shout out. He certainly deserves it. And Trudy is thanking you for your leadership every day.
And Governor, we thank you right back. I feel like we just circled back to you after this long program, but I also know you have to go. I can't tell you the pride that so many of us feel to live in a state that is led, as we said earlier, with conscience and with the belief that the government can not just play a positive role in people's lives, but actually help lift us all up and bring us all together. And we're so grateful for your leadership.
Well, I get all my good ideas from town hall, and then we try to put them in policy. So thanks for your leadership. I do need to excuse myself. We got some other things cooking.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Wash your hands, please. Be safe.
And with that, we do have more questions cooking, as you might imagine. The next one I should say is for Renee. Danny asks, how has the Alliance adjusted its strategy in the time of COVID?
Great question. We, as I mentioned earlier, have a staff that is so creative and so able to move and switch approaches so quickly. And I think we've seen that even as we're all sitting here today with hundreds of people from across the state having our luncheon. More in specific is we are just turning everything into virtual. We're learning how to organize virtually. We're learning how to do public education virtually. We're learning how to work with our partners that focus on implementing the laws that are on the books virtually. We've seen some amazing progress made in response to COVID in our state, with leaders from Spokane County to King County stepping in to make sure that protection orders are still being served, that there's a more equitable access to protection orders during this time of COVID. And a silver lining, a lot of the things that we're turning to technology to help us with are things that can make that equitable access remain even after we're through the pandemic and the crisis that is COVID. So keep watching. We're going to keep just adjusting to how we need to do our work, but our work, as we've already talked about, remains as important as ever, and our dedication remains as strong as ever, and we will keep adjusting and continue doing the work across the state.
Fantastic. I've got a few questions in a row here for Manny and Patricia. The first is from Sabrina. You've traveled the country working on GVP. What have you learned? How does Washington State compare to other areas of the country in your mind?
Beautiful. When we were there, we immediately thought that we will be able to live there forever. I mean, we love it.
Come on up.
And it's a lot of it's very related to Joaquin because of the music aspect of it. We were there before. Patricia was there before. We have family there, so we love it. But we also appreciate the fact that it's a kind of progressive thinking in terms of gun violence. And we were able to exchange all that information with locals, because that's the point. We bring what we know and we come back with some new knowledge. And then we sparse it all around the nation. What we do know is that this is happening everywhere. No one is safe. It's just like the COVID-19. Renee was mentioning that there was a decrease in school shootings. Of course, yes, they're empty. So that explains why when you play with the numbers of gun violence, there's always a bad result. And I actually think they keep talking about a second wave of the COVID. I think there's going to be a third one. I think there's going to be a third one that is going to be because of the guns that now we have at homes that were not there before. So those deaths, and I like to be very, there's no reason for me to stop saying what I think and what I believe will happen, because I will really appreciate if someone told me that before February 14th. So now our duty is to give information to everyone. Now you have a new gun at home. Are you sure where it is now? I'm pretty sure that someone that is listening to me right now, as soon as we're over, is going to go and check if the gun's still there. I swear to God, that's going to happen. So this is more than gun violence. We have a gun culture in America. And the bad part is that we are proud of our gun culture. And you know what? You don't need a gun culture to become a great country. So in addition to what our representatives are doing, and they were very clear, in addition to that, we need to slowly change that pride feeling of gun culture. And it's starting to happen because the kids that are working along with us and we're working along with them, they don't like the gun culture. They don't see it as a need, as something that we need, that is written in our Constitution. No, it's not a right, it's a privilege.
It's not an essential.
It's not an essential.
No.
So there's a lot going on. Things will change. I am convinced that things will change because it made sense. A few years ago, gay people were not able to get married. Now we go to these amazing weddings every once in a while, very frequently. And now there's guns everywhere. I'm pretty sure that the end of the story is that things are going to be very well regulated in order to save lives, which is what we should all want.
I hope so. I hope you're right. I feel it. When you talk to me, I feel it. We have time for one more question. Renee, Anne-Marie wants to know, what are the main talking points that are most effective in getting gun rights advocates to join the fight for better regulation? It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky and it's not. I mean, one of the things that we've learned at the Alliance over the past 6+ years, we have done an amazing amount of public opinion research, really know the kinds of messaging that does work. But I would say in terms of like a one-on-one conversation, if you really just have a conversation with someone who is a gun owner, who sees themselves as a gun rights activist, many of them will fall down the same lines when you get down to speaking about specific policies as the policies that we put forward. So I think part of it is just not being afraid to actually have the conversation. I've had conversations with numerous people who've served on panels on the other side. And when you get down to it, most people just want their children to be safe, want their families to be safe. And really focusing on what responsibility means, I think, is the most effective way to do that.
Thank you. Maybe it wasn't so hard after all, you're right. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions. And I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their experiences and expertise, and most important, their passionate commitment to this issue. It's galvanizing, I know, for me to hear people so engaged in this from such a centered place. So thank you all so much. Now we're going to play a short video that will tell the tale of two Washingtons.